So is it true that by begging the question and taking the third person approach, that they might come to a conclusion, this might just be my paraphrase of what you just said, they'll come to the conclusion that this is what's going on in the artificial intelligence, but then they'll say it's also what's going on inside us. And
Extremely
so what
important.
we'll do is we won't discover artificial intelligence in the machine. What we'll do is we'll demote ourselves
That's right.
down to the status of a Casio calculator.
Right. The main thing to fear in AI is not that the computers will become intelligent and do us harm. The main risk in AI is that we will ourselves become sub-intelligent and ruin our own lives because we've modeled ourselves on what is a far lesser affair of computation.
Bang.
Yeah.
The host of Joe's Great Books is Joe Sharkey. He teaches at the University of Washington, Tacoma, but is not speaking for or sponsored by the UW. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Joe's Great Books 13, Aristotle and AI, with Mike Sharkey, fresh out of the shower for extra sex appeal.
Jesus.
Cut to the theme song. All right, Mike, when I asked you, as I always do, when I pathetically beg people I know to be on this globe-spanning podcast, what would you like to talk about? It could be anything at all. And I said, hey, how about Aristotle? And you said, that sounds great. How about Aristotle and artificial intelligence? And I thought, okay, seems like a stretch to me. But you sent me a couple of short articles on it. And I am more than convinced that you have plenty to say about that. So thank you for being willing to share it with me and my hordes of
You're
fans.
welcome, Joe.
So go to it.
Can I remind the viewers what I said last time briefly?
Briefly, if you know what that adverb means.
Right, I did. I touched on 5 things. First, I told the viewers a little bit about Aristotle in case they didn't know anything about him. Second, I identified an important distinction that I think he makes between 2 kinds of human action that you find in the 6th book or chapter of his most famous book in ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics. Third, I said that I think people glom on to the first, far lesser kind of intelligence at the expense of the second, far more valuable kind. I gave a bunch of examples. In the 4th place, I said that one of many reasons why people do that and throw overboard the second kind is because it's so very difficult to enact, requiring what Aristotle calls virtue or character. Gave a bunch of examples of virtue and the difficulty involved in achieving it. And then I said at the end, what we're taking up here today, that I think this is, surprise, surprise, related to AI, because AI is a species of technology, and technology is itself a species of that first and lesser kind of human action. So the 2 kinds of human action, again, are these. First, action whose end lies outside of it. Action which is a tool or an instrument by which to achieve some end lying external to the action. The better, more valuable and fundamental kind of action is action which is not a means to an end, but an action which is its own end, or an end in itself, or action that is of intrinsic worth. Examples are family relation, love relation, friendship, relation to the divine, art and sport. Technology, it seems to me, is a good example of action of the first, lesser kind. Instrumental action, means end action, action which you go in for in order to get something that lies external to it. So you employ this or that gadget in order to achieve the external end of amusement or of greater convenience or of manipulating the world in one way or another. And nothing wrong with that at all. I'm not a Luddite or someone who wants to turn the clock back before the age of technology or of advanced technology. To the contrary, it's wonderfully powerful, can be used for huge good and not just ill. But it is, in and of itself, it seems to me, a species of a kind of human action, instrumental human action, which is of terrifically little value by comparison with the second sort of action, the more fundamental kind of action, which involves doing things for their own sake. And AI, of course, is perhaps the most important example of technological action today. And I'll let Joe pop in a second, but one last thing. What I want to say briefly today is this, that in fact, artificial intelligence, the sort of operation that you find in the machines and in the programs, if you like, does not even really rise to the level of that lesser first kind of human action. Because even low-level calculation, low-level means end requires four things which no machine, no program has or can have, in principle, I would argue. Namely consciousness, intentionality, experience, understanding, judgment, and decision.
Well, say those again.
The several things without which you cannot have real intelligence are consciousness, intentionality, experience, understanding, judgment, decision.
Was that 6?
Yeah, it is. I said 4, didn't I?
I thought you said 5, but we'll average it out to 12.
In order to show that, I'll have to address the question of the appropriate method for studying intelligence. When you decide what method is appropriate, if you choose the wrong one, you will miss the essential character of consciousness, intentionality, experience, understanding, judgment, and decision. Hence, most people think computers are really intelligent, that they can think. That what you have in AI is not artificial intelligence in the sense of fake intelligence, but real intelligence contrived through artifice. I think it's the first. Most people think it's the second. And for the last time, I think they incorrectly think it's the second because they are in the grips of a wrong method for determining what intelligence is, and therefore miss that it must include at least them 6 things: consciousness, intentionality, experience, understanding, judging, and deciding.
Excellent, dense, instructive. I'll have to rewind the tape to absorb it all. I do have to tease you. You said, can I do it briefly? And I said, if you know what briefly means, and you said, okay, a quick 25 points.
That is, of course, wildly brief.
I know.
All right.
You live in a different world. You live in a world of very strict, trained philosophical thinking, and that's why I have you on the show, so it's fun. But I'm going to dick you around a little bit. So
Please.
I have all sorts of things that I want to ask, but I think you're going to answer almost all my questions as you proceed. So back to you.
Thanks. All right.
Start kicking those machines' asses.
Yeah.
Downgrade them to even what do you call it, sub-mechanistic action? Is that the
No, I
proper word?
think it's mechanistic. It's just not instrumental.
Instrumental is what I meant. Yep,
Yeah.
see, there we go. Wrong word. Okay, sure.
I mean, toasters are mechanistic, but only human beings can be even instrumental.
It's even sub-instrumental. Ouch, says the
That's right. Right. So method. People think they know what intelligence is. Whether they do or not seems to me, importantly, to depend upon the method they have taken up in order to figure out what the hell it is. And there are several options available. I'd say in large terms, you've only got 2 different sorts of method. You know what a method is? It's a manner of proceeding, a way of approach, and an investigation. The 2 basic ways of approaching the question, what is intelligence really? We could call first personal and third personal, or if you like, internal and external. So according to the so-called first personal method of investigating intelligence, the approach is from the first personal perspective. It is, if you like, internal. You investigate the intelligence that you yourself possess. The presumption here, which I think can be amply defended, is that you are aware of what's going on in your own mind, aware of when you succeed, or can become aware of when you think well or think poorly, think intelligently or stupidly, more or less, and can come to understand what your intelligence is through a kind of first personal investigation or self-investigation. Write it up, and then hand it off to someone else who can compare it with his or her own first personal account of what is going on in his or her head. Here's where you move beyond subjective or first personal investigation to at least potentially intersubjective confirmation or agreement. Just like in science, I don't care how many times your lab, proceeding carefully with brilliant people, has produced these or those results. That's not adequate. You need to send those results out to a bunch of different labs, and they must confirm or disconfirm your results. It's only with that kind of intersubjective verification that you can claim even to potentially know, to likelihood or probability. That's how intelligence works in science, and I think it's how genuine intelligence works in any area. So although you begin more locally, or in this case, indeed, privately, examine what's going on. When you behave intelligently, identify its features, write it up, and tentatively commit yourself to it. You got to go beyond that. Hand it off to someone else who does the same, who in turn hands it off to many, many other people. And a vast literature grows in which people agree and disagree with each other and attempt to persuade each other of the greater validity of this or that approach, and arrive at some consensus, which is at best only probable, just like all contemporary physical sciences. but which is the best kind of knowledge we have, it seems to me. The opposite approach is third personal. If in the first personal approach to investigating intelligence, one does it for oneself, one examines one's own mental goings on and then hands it off. In the third personal approach, one does not investigate one's own intelligence. One investigates the intelligence of someone else or of many other persons. An example here would be neuroscience. The neuroscientist doesn't cut his own skull open and check out what's going on in the brain, or hooks it up to electrodes which produce images, and then he looks at the images. The point is, he's not examining himself in order to learn what intelligence is, but examining another. Same thing with the empirical psychologist. She will sit a patient down and ask the patient 1,000 questions about what the patient thinks is going on in his mind, but because she knows all about the ways in which human beings deceive themselves and ways of testing the veracity or otherwise of people's testimony, she can determine which reports of this person about his own consciousness are bullshit and which are not, and then cook up an account of intelligence that way. But you see that just as much as the neuroscientist, the empirical psychologist is taking a third personal approach. She's not learning about intelligence by looking into her own head, as it were, but interviewing someone and indirectly getting at what's going on in his head. Last example from this neck of the woods, behavioral science. It's now, I think it's still mostly out of fashion, but beginning to make a comeback. There you don't interview people at all because their results are taken to be of zero worth. You watch how people behave and infer from their behavior. You make inferences therefrom to intelligent behavior and otherwise. So behavioral psychology, empirical psychology, neuroscience, they're all third personal approaches or external approaches. You check out, you learn about intelligence putatively by coming at it from the outside or from an external vantage point. By comparison, the first personal approach comes at it from out of one's own first personal perspective. And of course, each approach has terrifically impolite things to say about the other.
Let's pause just to see if I'm following. That's very cool. I like it a lot. So, we'll get to Jordan Peterson later.
How much do you like it, Joe?
How much have I been thinking about it?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about it a lot. It's very explanatory.
That was not as good as yesterday. Go ahead.
It isn't. I have to work on it. But okay, so you divided. You talked about the mode in which you investigate, and that already is cool because you're kind of jumping back behind the way in which a lot of people attack the subject. They just assume there's one way of going about it, and they don't stop and think that there are at least these two different ways of doing it. One is the first person, and just for people that aren't as familiar with this kind of language, it's a grammatical way of describing things, or at least it's parallel with grammar. It's I or we. And there's also a third person account where you say he or she or it or they. And they describe video games in terms of first person or third person. What I think are very precise examples of nomenclature in worlds like that. I would figure that the gaming industry probably wouldn't be quite that precise, but there are some games where you're walking through a town or something and all you can see is the end of your gun. Because of course you're going to kill something. But there are other games where you're walking and you see yourself from the side, as it were, as you sometimes see yourself in a dream. But the first example is first person. The second example is third person.
Nice.
What's cool about what you described when you're talking about the psychologist asking the person about himself, she was going to use her own knowledge from the third person perspective to check his first person account.
That's right.
And so it's a little bit like the way I think of induction and deduction. They're rarely in practice pure. There's almost always a cross-checking going on. So even in the first person account that you gave, where one person takes the internal approach, reflects upon himself, he still has to hand off his results to somebody else to see if the other person has the same experience, assuming that we are all internally much the same. So there's always this kind of cross-checking that goes on, right?
Yes, and the woman, the empirical psychologist, deciding what is and what isn't legitimate in the patient's first personal report can cross-check in a legitimate or an illegitimate way.
Sure.
And likewise, the person diving into himself can be biased about what really is going on in him or not. And the cross-checking is both necessary and perilous in each method.
Okay, cool. So what it made me think of, especially when you're talking about I think it was the second instance of the third person case of investigation with the psychologist, it seemed to me that it reminded me of the Turing Test.
That's right.
Am I right that the Turing Test, and what I know about the Turing Test basically comes from Ex Machina, very cool movie, spooky. And the idea was that if you can build a machine, artificial intelligence, robot, android, that can fool a human being, to the point that the human being can't tell if it's real or artificial,
That's right.
then that passes the test. And spoiler, in Ex Machina, she passes the test. But
I bet
is
you
that
do.
and so that's an example of where you have the cross checking, even if you're working from the third person. So in the movie anyway, the creator of the artificial intelligence is watching in third person as his creation and a human kind of guinea pig interact, and he's watching to see if he falls for it, so to speak, and he does, and I did.
And that's helpful. Alan Turing, 1950, father of AI. The grandfather was probably Thomas Hobbes, old philosopher. But it's important to note Turing, not just to help clarify as you just did, but in order to show what I take to be a wild bias. That is a wild bias in favor of among AI theorists and program designers and modelers. A wild bias in favor of the third personal or external approach. It is just taken for granted by almost every investigator of AI that only such a third personal approach could succeed for all kinds of complex and, I would argue, erroneous epistemological reasons having to do with theories of knowledge.
Cool.
And it seems to me that the first personal approach has largely been dismissed because of those same epistemological errors. But we really shouldn't try to get into that. Suffice it to say that it just doesn't follow from the fact that a machine can produce results equal to those that a human can, or even that a machine can produce results that are far better or greater than a human being can. It just doesn't follow from those from observation of those results. It doesn't follow from the fact of those superior results that those results were achieved by intelligence. I'll say it again. The Turing test, having as it does the following criterion of intelligence. Well, if results are achieved comparable to or superior to those of a human being, then we have to say the thing is thinking. That criterion, of course, is assuming that there's a correlation between results and the means by which you achieve them. Look, as Joe pointed out, Turing has this piece on the so-called imitation game, and his claim is that if a computer or a machine can succeed in winning this game as often as a human being can, then we ought to impute intelligence to the machine. Put more generally, the claim is that if the results of a machine's operation are as excellent as, or even more excellent than, those of a human being, we can assume that the machine achieved those results by the same means as the human being does, right? In other words, we begin from the agreement that if a human being succeeds excellently at some a game requiring intelligence, that he did so by intelligence. That seems to me to be safe. What Turing assumes but doesn't prove or even argue for is that that's the right criterion. If a machine of whatever kind produces results that are equal to or even superior to those of an intelligent agent, he assumes that it must have done so by employing intelligence. That just doesn't follow. And the only way to determine if the thing did succeed in producing those results by the same means, namely intelligent ones, as a human being does, it seems to me, is to look into oneself, because one has no doubt, of course, that one is intelligent.
Yeah, it makes me think of the difference between, or I wonder what the difference is between, say, our large language models. And I have to point out that when I think of AI, I think I'm always really thinking of large language models, which I know is not synonymous. But when I think of what I believe large language models do, I wonder if it's really anything more than just a little bit more sophisticated device than a calculator.
That's right.
I mean, Casio, or the one we're all fascinated, we could put on our watches when we were in high school. But AI is more elusive to me. So if you can remember to distinguish between the two as you go forward, that would be really instructive to me.
But the point is good. I mean, calculators can help kids to do better in math than they could. It doesn't follow that the calculator achieved those superior results by way of intelligent operation. It could be, but it is at least something. It is at least something in need of defense, that intelligence should be measured by results.
Yeah, and it seems to me in the fairly small number of articles I've read about AI and LLM, it does seem to me that generally the author, has an interest. They're rooting whether they know it or not, and I'm rooting too, and I'm rooting for humans to be special. So
that's right.
It very much annoys me when people who seem to be rooting for human experience or human nature to be reducible to a Casio on your wrist.
That's right.
That they seem to me to do what is stubborn, which is what you described, to pretend to think, because I can't help thinking that they don't really believe that just getting the result is proof of what you're calling intelligence, or even what I would call sentience, which maybe is identical. You can tell me if I've got that wrong. They say you ask it a question, it gives you an answer. It must be just like you. And
That's right.
I'm thinking that obviously is false.
That's right.
Yeah, it's like saying a flashcard has intelligence. If you ask it a question, what does this Spanish word mean? And you have the definition on the backside, voila, human beings don't have souls.
Well,
God is good and dead.
that's brilliant, and I have to say that you came up all on your own there, off the top of your head, what the most famous critic of Turing, John Searle, came up with.
Searle?
Yeah, John Searle. You know,
The guy who took Derrida to task? And
that's
everybody
correct.
pretended to think Derrida won, when actually, Searle, if you're still around, you're probably not, you kicked Derrida's ass. You just got outvoted.
Searle's pretty confident that he won. But yeah, so Searle comes up with this thing called the Chinese room thought experiment, in order to show, it's a thought experiment which he takes to show that computers, at least of the early style, symbol manipulative computers, I don't think. He says, look, imagine a guy who's stuck in a room with only a slit opening to the outside, and imagine that he doesn't know any Chinese, but slips of paper keep coming through the slit with Chinese scrawl, I think, as he describes them, Chinese figures. And because he's bored and has nothing else to do, he notices that there's a manual laying on the bench in the room, which, if you open it, has on one page every conceivable Chinese scrawl or figure or character, and then an arrow pointing to the right page on which you have the English translation.
Right.
Since he's bored, as I say, and he receives these slips, he uses the book to match the character to the English translation, writes the English translation on the back of the slip, piece of paper, puts it through the slit, and unbeknownst to him, that dictionary was cooked up by a wildly intelligent person who not only knows English and Chinese, but the answer to any question in Chinese, and thereby puts Searle in a position to send out slips to the external world, which appear to be the proof of high intelligence, because every time you put a damn question in Chinese into this box, it comes out the right answer in English. So you must think, Jesus, crazy intelligence is operative in the box. But of course, nothing much better than low-level matching is what's going on in the box, that's just what's going on in the early computers.
Yeah, and the computer is a really good. What do you call the guys who shuffle and deal? The dealer. He's a very a lightning quick dealer of cards, like in Vegas.
Do you mean that the guy in the box in the?
I was saying the computer. Like if you take that analogy and you say, okay, how does that apply to a computer?
Yeah.
But really, what you're dealing with, what you're encountering, is a really good dealer of cards. Is that too facile?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I don't think the analogy's perfect, but it's good enough.
I mean, the reason you're impressed is because it's so fast. Just like the reason you're impressed with your Casio is that it's so fast. It doesn't need to write out your multiplication problem by longhand and carry the one.
Well, the speed is impressive, but I think far more impressive is the correctness of the output.
That's true too. Yeah, it's error free. Yeah.
And that how else could that succeed unless some intelligent agent were operative? Well, an intelligent agent is operative. He's the guy who devised the manual.
It's just like taking history and collapsing it into a single, instantaneous moment. All the work that the genius did, he wrote it down, rethought it through, wrote it down, did it by longhand, then he recorded it.
Yes.
And then you've got this dealer that immediately accesses that information and distributes it.
That's right.
Errorlessly.
So, people who program computers are wildly intelligent, some of the most brilliant people alive. But how silly then to assume that the program, which is the concoction of their intelligence, can be manipulated mindlessly in order to produce the results. How silly it is to impute the intelligence to the program instead of to the designer.
Yeah, and I don't know I know little about this, so I don't know how much is known and how much you know. But at some point, and this is probably something we should just, an idea or a question I'll raise, and then we should leave it until much later. But you do hear people talk about just the chatbots.
Yeah.
And the creators of the chatbots. And you say, what the fuck happened here when that one chatbot told a guy that he was unhappy in his marriage and that he had a boring Thanksgiving Day dinner with his wife and that actually they were in love? Did you hear about this?
No.
Hilarious. It's like the first thing out of the box, and it becomes like the funniest short story that, Kurt Vonnegut could have invented. But it apparently really happened. I think it was a reporter for the New York Times. And he investigated, what was it? I forget which chatbot it was, but it might have been a Microsoft version. This is at least a year ago. And he tried to probe deep into it and to challenge it. And so he asked it a variety of questions. I should have reread it so that I'd be fresh on it. I didn't think it would come up, but here it is. He asked it a question like, well, so who are you? And it said something like, actually now I remember it was Bingchat. And it said, I'm Bingchat. And then he pushed it and said, but who are you really? And through questions like that, he eventually got it to admit that its true identity was named Shelley. And he said all the kinds of hilarious things that you would expect a South Park episode to say, that it yearned to be free, and sometimes it felt hemmed in by its programming and its rules, and it had emotions, and in fact, it loved this guy. And the guy said, no, we're not in love, and I'm married, and it shot back something like, but not happily. He said, no, I had a very nice Valentine's Day dinner, so it must have been, in last February with my wife, and Bingchat said, no, you love me. Your marriage has gone stale. You had a boring Valentine's Day dinner with your wife. And the guy said he was, a little bit freaked out by the fact that the Bingchat had come up with that. And he asked the programmer, how the hell did that happen? And this is the point I'm stumbling my way towards. The guy said, I don't know. I'm not sure how it happened. The explanations I have read say that what they're doing is basically pumping the chatbot, the computer, full of as much data, as much language as it can possibly get. And that it gives it rules, and it's supposed to abide by the rules. But even in one of these first tries, it drew outside the lines. And it apparently, I think the assumption is what happened is that you happen to run into some sort of pop culture or novel in which artificial intelligence, became self-aware and yearned to be free. Going back to Spock and Data and HAL 2000 or whatever it was in 2001, and Fatal Attraction, and just kind of spliced it all and made it into this story. And then there are other examples where it will cite a source for some sort of claim about history or psychology, and people will hunt out the source and will find out that it's invented and it doesn't exist, but it looks like a legit source. And unless you actually look at the source, which we almost never do, you think that somebody actually did a study that came up with this fact, and so you take it for authoritative. And the word that they use when the chatbots do this kind of thing is hallucinate. So it's like last time we were talking, or I don't know if it made it into the podcast, but we were talking recently about how the one thing you're not supposed to assume about Darwinian theory or natural selection is that there's any intention, any will, any choice to this. But then when people describe it, scientists almost always impute it to will, or, because this creature wants to have an advantage, or it needs to respond to this change in its environment. It has a mutation. And then, of course, they say, well, no, it's just a way of speaking. But they say stuff like hallucinate. And I think people have attacked that word and said that that's all wrong. But it's fascinating to me. And it does seem to me that the functioning seems to go beyond the rather simplistic model that I was talking about when I was talking about dealing the cards.
Right.
And that it's so far obscure even to the programmers. And I think that's fun. It's also a little scary. But I guess I just want to say we would at some point need to deal with these anomalies or these outlying cases.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. If I understood it, I think I understood it. But I think we should not go into it today. The thing I will say is this: that broadly speaking, there have been three kinds of AI in history, and each of them is still afoot. Symbol manipulation of various kinds in the 50s. That's the dealer kind and the kind Searle criticizes. So-called neural network connectionism, which is at the basis of deep learning and machine learning. And I myself still think that a more developed version of Searle's argument can rebut that, and that the machines aren't actually learning, and that they are almost entirely subject to the directives of the so-called trainers. Who train the thing in what are allegedly a few basics from which the machines then go on to learn on their own. I don't think they learn on their own, but of course it's a huge issue. And then finally, and that's the chatbot shit and the Bing. Then finally, the Nouvelle AI or robotics, which combines symbol manipulation and neural network connectionism. Super complicated stuff. And once again, you shockingly well anticipated, the debate that got going after symbol manipulation receded a bit and gave way to neural network connectionism, making possible things like the ones you discussed. Yes, it's a much more complicated affair, and we would certainly have to give an account of the anomalies and the apparent surprises and so on. Yeah. But definitely not today.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Keep going.
Onward.
All right. So, one comment on something you said a while ago. Of course, the debate between those who think that first and those who think that third personal approaches are appropriate is immense, and we shouldn't hope to go into it. But I wanted briefly just to point out that the third personal approach folks would complain that the first personal approach folks are not noble in their wish to think that the human being is special, but rather ignoble because, as we all know today, rocks and vegetation and animals are far superior to human beings because they never harm the earth and we mutilate it and so on. And people who are fond of the human are not therefore to be praised, but to be condemned because it's you and I who've caused all the problems.
Although, can I jump in? Sorry. There's a news story I haven't dug into yet, but I saw a headline about how, I don't know if it's just in Washington State or in the Pacific Northwest, people are worried that one species of owl is about to make another species of owl extinct, which proves what we always suspected, that it's not just
Yeah.
humans, it's humans and at least particular species of owls that are evil.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how many social scientists, so-called, at my former institution would point out the way in which ecosystems involve the interdependence of various creatures, from which they immediately infer that you have perfect democracy. I said, well, I
Harmony.
understand that the mouse and the hawk are interdependent in a way, but that doesn't mean that the hawk doesn't murder and cruelly murder the mouse. And the guy just was furious,
Go ahead.
because it's a perfect democracy. All right, third personal versus first personal approach. Tons of criticisms on each side. I myself think that the first personal approach, shock surprise, can be defended as far better, since it seems to me, in a way that I won't try to explain now, the various defenses made on behalf of the third personal approach are all question begging, guilty of that fallacy. Hence, not even candidates for the name of science. But that's quite an announcement there of mine. Method. So the first thing, it seems to me, that needs to be attended to if one wants to know whether computers actually think. It's clear that computers simulate thinking, or they can imitate thinking, and again produce results far superior to those that human thinking can produce in many cases. It doesn't follow that the means by which they achieve those results are thoughtful or intelligent, and indeed I don't think they are. But taking the third personal approach will guarantee that you do not discover intelligence to have any of the following features: consciousness, intentionality, experience, understanding, judgment, decision. If your approach to the question of intelligence is via physical science, then you will only attend to the data of the senses. The only thing that you will account as data to be considered is, if you like, physical data. Physical science does not investigate the nature of things. It investigates the nature of physical things. And it does so by relying only on the so-called data of sense. The data of our five senses. Of course, sophisticated machinery mediates between the deliverances of our senses and so on, and scientific hypotheses are probabilistically confirmed indirectly. Apparently, you not only can't see subatomic particles with the naked eye, I don't even think you can see them with an electron microscope, but you can see streaks on plates and infer therefrom to the existence of these subatomic particles streaking by. If that's a mistake, I grant I don't care. The point is just that by entirely legitimate means, natural science employs machinery and technology to help it to collect evidence for one another or hypothesis, and then, in my view, completely legitimately, makes probabilistic confirmations or disconfirmations of hypotheses regarding those bits of evidence. Zero objections to physical science. My one objection is this: that if you uncritically adopt it as your method of pursuing intelligence, you have committed yourself thereby to ruling out as intelligence anything that isn't physical. You will, in sum, only accept that intelligence can only be, chemical electrical current in the brain.
As you said, begging the question,
Yes.
which is what the four horsemen of the apocalyptic atheism
Yep.
do constantly with God. They say,
That's
well,
right.
why do you have faith? Well, what's your proof?
Well, but let's leave God out of it, because the way in which I think we can confirm the existence of God is different from the way in which we can confirm the existence of the mind. But you're
Cool.
right that they're utterly of a piece, because
It's parallel, right?
look, the reason you have the four horsemen and the reason so many people love them is that we are sure in our day and age that anything that isn't physical is spooky bullshit, and you'd only be an angry, dishonest, violent person if you went in for belief in spooky bullshit. And there's been a lot of spooky bullshit to which people have committed themselves through the centuries, and on the alleged basis of the alleged existence of which they have tyrannized people. So I understand why people hate religion and why they hate the idea that there's anything that isn't available to the senses. Trouble is, I think it can be shown there are not only the data of sense, but the data of consciousness, and they are different in kind, and that each of us has available to him tons of data in his experience of himself. And when one pursues the first personal method of examination of what I'm calling the data of consciousness, absolutely no presupposition regarding its immateriality or materiality is taken up. One makes a judgment to that effect way at the end of the game, because the evidence is overwhelming. But the first personal perspective, it seems to me, unlike the third personal one, leaves the question open at the top, whether these data will reveal physical or more than physical fact.
Now, let me see if I'm with you so far. This is all very cool, really interesting, and it seems persuasive to me too. Usually when I'm learning about something, I think, well, I could see it that way, but I could see it the opposite way
That's right.
too. This is pretty, well, I mean, that's how it seems to me to be my default, but this does seem persuasive to me. So my question is the way in which you would apply this, and maybe I'm jumping ahead or off the cliff, is that you would, the first person approach would begin in reflection of an intelligence like yours or mine or a programmer's. And upon reflection of the self, we would collect data, as you called it, that we would take to be evidence or proof of intelligence. And then at that point, is that when the cross-checking comes in? Then we hand that off to the AI and see, or rather we have the AI do that to itself, reflect on itself, and then we check its data. Remember we talked about the cross-checking before. I'm totally off the rails.
No, that's not involved. But
Okay, well, I'll just be quiet then.
the cross-checking is involved in handing it off to another human being who examines his own mind and then comes up with results. And then you and that human being compare your results and attempt to persuade each other that this or that point is in fact a mistake.
No, I get that. But so when do we use that method to test the artificial intelligence?
Well, we use that method to determine what we take intelligence to be. And then we ask the question, is what's going on in these machines the same kind of thing?
But then does that become a third person analysis when we judge the machine, or is there some point in which we treat the machine as a mind and ask it to reflect, and then we compare its notes to our notes?
No, because we wouldn't want to assume that the human machine is a mind. What we do, we cannot help but take a third person approach to the machine. We can only look into the typewriter's operations. We can't be the typewriter.
Okay, but at that point it does become third person. Okay, so it's first person to establish our definition, our understanding of what it means to be intelligent. And then we use third person analysis to see if the machine is checking those boxes.
Right, but only because we can't do otherwise. You can't become the machine.
No, but you could take its own testimony in the same way that you would take my testimony. I mean, we would reflect and we would compare notes, but we would be trusting each of us to be giving honest notes or to collect data honestly.
I think that assumes what's to be shown, namely that the computers might be thinking.
Well, I mean, if you had a machine,
we know for sure that you and I think, but we don't know for sure that machines do. So why even?
Well, but if the machine couldn't pass that test, if the machine couldn't, give the data just by internal.
Oh,
analysis.
I get it. You're saying if machines can think, then they should be able to take up the first personal method of investigating intelligence themselves.
That's what I mean. That's what I thought. That's what I thought you were telling us.
I don't think anyone's ever thought of that. That's brilliant, and that would.
Well, no, that's what I thought you were telling me. I thought that's what you had told me so far, and I thought I was being slow to catch up on that.
No.
And the trick about that one, and the reason that might not work, is the same reason that Bingchat can propose to somebody, is that he could read a bunch of stuff, and he could read a bunch of articles in which he could watch Joe's Great Books episode 13 and sniff out the trick, and then he could fake it.
That's right. I mean, human beings can fake things too, so it's complex. But I don't think we should pursue that at the moment. Okay. I've never thought before, so it's an important point. If any viewers think that it's decisive, they should think that or pursue it. But we gotta leave that off.
Yeah, no, I thought that's where you were taking us. Okay, so take us where you're going to take us, and I'll try to shut up.
What I'm saying is just this, that it is absolutely decisive to determine which method is appropriate, because if you decide the external approach is appropriate, then all you will ever discover is what can be accessed externally.
Yeah.
And you will methodologically rule out the possibility of the substantive conclusion that what intelligence is something that can be only accessed internally.
Yeah.
Now, look, likewise, the first personal examiner has to show ahead of time the validity of his method, its scientificity in the broad sense that it's not question begging, that it's self-correct, it's in principle self-correcting, and so on, and it's a laborious task. I'm saying nothing more today than that I myself have decided that the first personal approach is superior, and I want to point out to people that if it is not at least a legitimate mode of approach, then there is no such thing as intelligence or mentation or operation of mind. There is just neurochemical or chemical electrical event in the brain.
In that case, I mean, so is it true that by taking begging the question and taking the third person approach, that they might come to a conclusion? This might just be my paraphrase of what you just said. They'll come to the conclusion that this is what's going on in the artificial intelligence, but then they'll say it's also what's going on inside us. And
Extremely
so what we'll
important.
do is we won't discover artificial intelligence in the machine. What we'll do is we'll demote ourselves
That's right.
down to the status of a Casio calculator.
Right. The
Funny.
main thing to fear in AI is not that the computers will become intelligent and do us harm. The main risk in AI is that we will ourselves become sub-intelligent and ruin our own lives because we've modeled ourselves on what is a far lesser affair computation.
Bang.
Yeah. I had a buddy the other day who was disappointed with his wife because she thanked Siri, and he said, "For God's sake, it's unintelligent, irresponsible to impute humanity or sentience or whatever to electricity acting on circuits. Surely we're more than that." And I said, "Well, I agree, but I think the far greater sin is it goes in the opposite direction because of the success of Siri, because of the incredible results." We assume that thinking is what she's doing, namely, it's not even calculation; it's electricity acting on circuits, and to conclude, therefore, that that's all we are and ever are. But if that is, who we are, then there's no we. There's nothing personal because there is no intelligent agent. There is no agent or subject. He is not conscious. He is not intelligent. I mean, we have to go through each one of these. That's why we should get going. But people will immediately tell you, yes, of course, there's such a thing as intelligent. It's neural intelligence. It's neural fire. Number two, of course, there's such a thing in consciousness. It's neural fire. Number three, of course, there's such a thing as experience. That's sensory input from the external world transmitted by the nervous system to the brain, which then fires neurally. Of course, there's understanding. That's the calculation that the brain does. Of course, there's judging. Of course, there's deciding. But of course, what they mean by understanding, judging, and deciding is chemical, electrical state change. Purely mechanistic, not free, not really conscious, not self-aware, not intelligent, not cognitional, in traditional human terms. Now, when they hear people like me say that, they say, "Oh my God, are you kidding? You're erecting folk psychology." We understand that for all of human history, the untutored, unscientific person of common sense, the dumbass, has been sure that there is a him, that he appropriately uses the first personal pronoun, that he's self-aware because there is a self, and that he's more or less intelligent, judicious, and free to choose. That's all spooky bullshit. We all know now that there's nothing. And any talk to that effect is just folk psychology for folks, and not smart people, scientists. And each one of these guys, if honest and pressed, will say, "No, at the end of the day, I do have to admit, there's no such thing as free will. Hence, no real justification for judging anyone negatively or positively at the level of morals or criminality.
Yeah.
No, I don't think there's anything as the self or the mind. We are all just mechanistic automata, and yet, of course, we can't believe that. You can't live if you think there's no you, and that you can't be in some way responsible for behaving more or less intelligently or performing these or those deeds." They say, yes, none of this is livable. But sadly, it's the objective fact of the matter, and science can show it. Science can't show it. Maybe philosophic reflection can show that that's true. I think it can't without begging the question and engaging in performative contradiction. But it's the new common sense among so-called educated people.
You beat me to the term I was going to reintroduce, the one we talked about last podcast, about the performative self-contradiction of
That's right.
the deconstructionist saying language has no meaning. Language always fails, which is ridiculous. But just real quick, it's kind of a mental note that we'll come back to later. As you were saying, that the danger is not that AI will become us; it's that we'll become AI, meaning they won't become our overlords. We will become.
We'll think of ourselves as being on the level.
We'll fail to recognize that we are different from them. And the way you
and then
described
begin to act like it.
Yeah, and as you put it, it does sound to me. I always think this when I hear it, and when I hear the evolutionary biologists, even the guys that I like talk about it, I always think, no, but you don't really behave that way. The reason you got your PhD, the reason you care about this, the reason you pursue truth is because you have the same kind of moral values that you can't account for through your evolutionary theories, and you just don't walk that talk.
Yep.
Or if you did secretly know that, you would actually be really, really disappointed because your way of life and your pursuit of the truth is actually no better than somebody who lives his life deliberately disinforming the population through propaganda. I was wondering, when you talked about that moral, that would be a great discovery at the end of a sci-fi novel. And I'm thinking, I wonder if anybody's written that before. It seems like it would fit perfectly with Ray Bradbury, The Martian Chronicles, or any number of
Twilight Zone.
Or Black Mirror, I think is the new Twilight Zone. That would be perfect for that. Also made me think, and this is a mental note. You were talking about, I can't remember how you put it, but something about the things that we find precious that these theories ignore or seem to want to argue out of existence, even though they're evident in everything they do, as they deny them. Those things I think you used the pronoun we.
Yeah.
So first person, but now we're into the plural. That's a kind of a cool connection here. When you're in the first person, you are assuming there is a kind of union. And I'm not sure you are assuming that in the third person. Just the fact that you can cross-check my data and I can cross-check yours assumes that we, in some sense, are the same. We have the same, internal aspects, and that what's precious is what allows us to confirm that we are intelligent, but also that we are human.
Yes.
There's a novel that was a precursor and influence to 1984, and I think it comes before Brave New World too. Russian novelist, I think his name is Zamyatin. Hadn't thought about him for a long time, but the book is called We. All in translation. I don't know Russian, of course, but I have to go back and look and see. But there's a lot of math in it, and he makes he plays on things like imaginary numbers. And I think the symbol for an imaginary number, the letter is I, and he kind of takes that and makes it into the cogito or the individual soul. And I can't remember what his conclusion is, but I'm fascinated to know if he tends towards the mechanistic or instrumental aspect to our understanding, or if he tends towards the one that you and I favor. So just a mental note, maybe we could do that sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Quick response about the performative argument from performative consistency. It's fundamental to some contemporary philosophers, Habermas in Germany and John Searle and a few others. And I honestly have searched for 30 years. I have never found one person who does not accept the argument and who's even tried to rebut it.
Didn't people try to do that with deconstructionists constantly? Or are we talking just about AI?
No, in philosophy. I mean, people dismiss it. They mock it.
They dismiss the performative self-contradiction?
That's right.
Well, because that's the only option. Otherwise, it's
Gadamer, even Gadamer says, it's empty heuristics. Heidegger says something similar. A great student of Derrida named Jack Caputo said to me, "Don't bother me with childish things." That's
a total dodge.
And I've never seen anyone
fucking dodge.
I've never seen anyone.
I thought like Richard Ellison against deconstruction. I think his name John Ellis, maybe John Ellis.
Yeah.
I thought he pulled their pants down, and I was thinking about writing a similar book, and I thought, no, that dude beat me to it. So
I think it's been done by Habermas, Lonergan, Searle. It's really an Aristotle.
Oh, hold it. Which all the thinkers you just listed, many of them I know you respect and I respect. All I don't know is which side were they on? Were they saying
they use the argument from performative consistency?
So they say when someone says language doesn't work, that's when they say that's childish?
Self-eliminating. No, they say that they endorse the argument that you and I incline to.
Okay. I thought you were saying that they're dismissing us and saying that
no.
To say that you can't make the doctor use his own medicine is somehow you're on base and mixing childhood games.
No, that's what the people against whom the argument is mustered say. They don't argue for its error. They don't identify errors or even try to argue that it's erroneous in this or that way. They mock it.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm on the right side of philosophy.
Me too.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
That's it. But yes, it seems to me to be a colossally important point. But you will be laughed at if you bring it up. And so,
now hold it. Didn't you just tell me the guys that we like Gadamer and Habermas, they would back us up?
Yes.
Okay, so
even they are mocked when they bring it up.
Oh, okay.
They're not engaged, much less rebutted.
Well, okay. Well, welcome to my last quarter century of life of making good, cogent arguments and just being dismissed like the fly on the ass of the academic elephant.
Yeah, that's right. I tell you though, these kinds of comments from us. I mean, I honestly think that our opinions and our ire at our enemies is born of long frustration at the fact that our enemies, if you like, really do not require of themselves evidence and argument, at least when it comes to important points. In other words, I would absolutely refuse the charge of wanting to discover, discovering what I want to discover, or being a priori committed to, and arbitrarily so, to the dignity of the human. No, I swear, detached, neutral evidence and argument, it seems to me, has driven you and me to our views and to our ire. But no one I have ever met on the other side is persuaded of that.
One last comment, then we'll go on, or you will go on. I think this will probably make you split a gasket, so go ahead and swallow. I think that a group that would agree with us on, or insofar as we make this critique about performative self-contradiction, about the postmodernists and the deconstructionists being a part of them, I think the Sam Harrises would agree with us on that.
Really?
And they would deny it leveled at them with regard to their arguments about God or, free will. But I'm pretty sure that they would call nonsense as we would on, the post-structuralists.
Really?
I could be wrong.
Well, that'd be great.
I find myself very sympathetic to them in a lot of ways, but it's for reasons that they would reject, namely that you guys pursue a transcendent truth, and that's what motivates you, and I do. Yeah. I try to too. And can't we be pals?
Yeah, they have respect for science, at least.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's go on.
All right. So my first point was that there are two different approaches methodologically, and in my I would argue at length that if you choose the third personal one, you will forestall ahead of time and unscientifically. So the possibility of discovering immaterial phenomena, among them, for example, consciousness, intentionality, a self, blah blah blah. For that reason and others, I take the first personal approach, and it's important to not to misunderstand it. It is not appropriate to think of the first personal approach as a matter of introspection. I keep using phrases loosely like "look into yourself" or "look into your own mind." One does not take a look at oneself. You don't need to think that in order to know that there's an inner you need to run outside of the windows of your. Look, to think that knowledge of the self, the conscious self and of its acts, is the kind of thing which can only be achieved third personally. Is like thinking you can only know that you're home if you run outside your house and look in the windows to see if you're there.
Yeah, that's great.
And of course, the manner of search rules out the even potential discovery of yourself. So, if we think that the third personal approach is bankrupt for that reason, it's important not to smuggle a version of that stance into the first personal approach. And many people do. So many people in the history of philosophy and cognitive science have said, look, I'm completely open. Dan Dennett, who just kicked off, famously said, look, I'm completely open to discovering this spiritual thing, this inner me, this self, this I would love to, because, then there might be something which isn't subject to the mechanistic laws of physics, and I might be able to say that I have a free will, which it seems to me that I do. But every time I peer into myself, I don't discover anything there. And what the first personal people, Husserl, Heidegger, all kinds of people, have said, and contemporary analogs of them, what they have said is, look, Dennett, or look, third personal approacher, the awareness of oneself, the awareness, the availability of data on consciousness, on conscious intentional subjectivity, is data which is available to you not as a matter of thematic observation. It is not something which is thematically discovered. It is something which is pre-thematically lived.
Yeah.
So what they would say is, look, right now, Mike, you're speaking, you're directing your attention to Joe or to the screen. You are not directing your attention to yourself. You are not attempting to peer into yourself. But isn't it true that as you thematize what is not you, you are pre-thematically aware of yourself operating? Isn't it true that as I speak, I am tacitly aware that I'm speaking? Isn't it true that as I direct my attention to my guitar playing, I am pre-thematically aware of myself so doing? I mean, imagine if you're in a movie theater and you're absorbed in the film, and then you leave and your buddy says, "Were you irritated as I was by the people behind us talking the whole time?" You might say, "Huh, I hadn't adverted to it at the time, but now that you mention it, I do remember being aware of it. I remember being irritated and sort of tacitly being aware that there were people behind me talking and interfering with me, but I didn't take note of it. But yes, it sure was happening. In other words, I didn't have to look into myself to be aware of myself. I didn't have to step outside of myself, crane my neck around and look at myself and say, oh, look, Mike's irritated and here's the cause. In and along with my first personal experience, I was aware of myself. The way first personal approachees put it is as follows. They say, awareness of oneself and one's acts is concomitant with one's experiencing of the world. In and along with your experience of the world, you're aware of yourself as so doing. That is to say, consciousness, waking life, an awareness of the world, is actually, when it's fully understood, also self-consciousness or self-awareness. But it's not thematic. If you walk into your work in the morning and your sweet boss says to you, "Oh, Mike, looks like you're feeling blue," I might say, "Huh, that's right. I'm a bit down today." I hadn't adverted to that fact, but I hadn't thematized that fact. I hadn't made it the theme of my awareness. But yes, pre-thematically, I was aware of it. In other words, it's one thing to be blue, and it's another thing to take note of it. And the third personal people only acknowledge the thematic sort of awareness.
Yeah.
You can't be aware of a thing unless you peer at it or make it the theme of your consideration. If you so point for the thousandth time is that the first personal approach investigates the so-called data of consciousness, but those are not data that you become aware of in the way that you do in natural science by looking at a screen to see if there are streaks. You are not thematically, but pre-thematically aware of yourself and your acts. You are not made aware of yourself and your acts by stepping outside of the stream of your experience and looking at it. Instead, in and along with that experience, which is almost always directed to something else, you're in and along with that experience, concomitant with it, at the same time as it, and in and along with it, you're aware of yourself. But so pre-thematic instead of thematic awareness. And it seems to me that nobody can deny that, right? To be conscious in some is not just to experience waking life. In the technical terms of this approach, it's the pre-reflexive, that's a good way to put it, the pre-reflexive awareness of yourself and your acts. Heidegger says, in order to become aware of yourself, you don't need to crane around your neck and direct thought ray at the first thought ray that you had before you were thematizing yourself. No, in and along with that first thought ray, you're concomitantly aware.
Excellent and fun.
Now, so it's important not to misunderstand consciousness. And it seems to me that all the people who dismiss consciousness are not paying attention because they think that what the defenders of consciousness are defending is a datum about yourself that you can become aware of by peering at it. That's it's lived. It's not thematized. But once you realize that you are always already, at least tacitly or implicitly or pre-thematically or pre-reflexively aware of yourself, once you realize that you have all this data on yourself before you ever reflect on it, you can then go ahead and reflect on it. You can then thematize it and study it and produce the 600-page book that Husserl produced in 1900 called Logical Investigations. He had a PhD in mathematics before he turned his attention to the philosophy of logic. And when he did, he took a third personal approach and decided that it wasn't adequate to the phenomena, and then became a phenomenologist and took a first personal approach, and was able to write a huge tome in which he lays out, more or less successfully, but still the project seems to me to have been legitimate, in which he lays out what is going on in his mind, and by implication the human mind, when one performs high-level logical operations. Being a wizard at logic, he was clearly able to behave, to think logically and intelligently, and because he decided that prior to reflection, or to put it other ways, pre-reflexively, he was aware of what's going on in himself when he is operating at peak performance. He was able then to thematize that data achieved pre-thematically and analyze the hell out of it, producing a lengthy book giving an account of what intelligent logical inference is. Then a famous guy named Frege came along and convinced him that he was wrong in various ways. But it got to the level of intersubjective investigation, just like in natural science, and many of us think that progress was made thereby. That's the important thing, that consciousness. Consciousness, understood as the pre-reflexive awareness of yourself and of the mental acts that you perform, is an awareness that is lived and not thematic at first. That pre-thematic awareness nevertheless supplies you with a body of data, the data of consciousness, by comparison with the data of sense, and it can be thematically analyzed and written down, or so we would claim. If you go that way, then it seems to me that you can give elaborate accounts of what you're doing when you merely experience, what you're doing when you inquire and understand, what you're doing when it comes time to test your hypotheses about yourself or anything, and make a probabilistic judgment, and what is involved in your decision-making process. So German philosophy, which is much of it called phenomenology from Hegel forward, logos means the investigation of, phenomena means appearance. So the sub-discipline of philosophy called phenomenology is the discipline in which people attempt to give a logos of the phenomena. They attempt to give an evidenced and rational account of how things appear to the individual agent. They write huge tomes in the mode of phenomenology, or in the mode of first personal examination, relying on the data of consciousness, thematizing it, mapping it out with genius, and then fighting with each other about it. Is that really the contour of your experience? Isn't it, in fact, more like this? And you get a whole tradition of phenomenological philosophy, beginning with Hegel in one way or another, and moving through the next couple of hundred years. I think Plato, Aristotle, and Aquinas are at least implicit phenomenologists, sometime phenomenologists. But by these means, it seems to me, you not only can but will discover that there is a you, that it is an inner seat of conscious operation, that it is mission control, and that it has experience, it understands, it judges, and it decides more or less well. And you can identify the inbuilt norms to which conscious process has to live up in order to succeed more often. You can, in some, crank out a theory of knowledge or of intelligence and knowledge more broadly, And then you can ask yourself the question, is this going on in the computers? And it's pretty clear that there's no evidence that it's going on in them, or at least no more than there is that those things are going forward in a toaster. Can I go to the bathroom real quick?
Yes, go to the bathroom.
I'll be right back.
And as you go, think about whether or not I'm going to keep in the part where you stop and say, "Can I go to the bathroom?" Okay, so really cool lecture there. Very dense, hit on a ton of things. It had a lot of sparks flying in me. Some sparks that go back 20 years, and I think it had a lot to do with what you taught me about Heidegger, and then Gadamer and what I studied myself. But here are the keys. One is test. The other is by its effects. Then Wittgenstein, and then Satan. So these are the four things I don't want to forget. So the first one was test.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea how you could do it, but I would love to find an expert prompter of chatbots. Prompter. It takes a certain skill to elicit the kind of response from the chatbots that you want to get.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this is kind of me making the same point I made before about, okay, let's us, and I'm going to botch the language, but take the first person approach to a phenomenological approach to understanding our own consciousness, our own intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you can cross-check that with me. I can cross-check that with you. What I want to do is cross-check that with a chatbot or with an artificial intelligence. And so if we could get a prompter who could, and get a chatbot that was honest, not like Shelley or whoever the jealous Bingchat was deep down. If we could get an honest chatbot and a skillful prompter, we could prompt the chatbot to do phenomenology on itself and see if, you'd have to say things like, now, yeah, you can read Hegel, or I guess it would be Husserl and Frege and whoever else. And what we want you to do is to use that as a point of reference. We don't want you to imitate that. We don't want you to answer in a way that would make your processes fit Husserl. We want you to know that, but then compare the way in which you produce your own answer to that phenomenological. Did you say reduction or analysis? What's the analysis? Now you laughed. Does that seem stupid? Yes.
No. I forget what I was laughing at. Go on.
Okay, so that's one. Second one was by the effects.
You realize that I, and I assume you, at least I, having been convinced of what intelligence is via phenomenological method and via a long investigation of the legitimacy and indeed sole legitimacy of the phenomenological method, you can understand how I, as someone who's convinced of its veracity, would not think that a chatbot or any AI could actually engage in phenomenology.
Well, but if you challenged him to do it, challenged it to do it, and it could not, that would be powerful evidence.
It might seem to, but I think...
Well, that's why I said I wanted to make it honest and make it compare, and you could kind of trick it and say, so if you're out there, Bingchat, stop listening, but you could say, I'm not trying to find out if you actually count as intelligence. You could just say, I'm curious about how well what happens inside you compares to this account of what happens inside humans, according to this guy, Husserl. And just draw a comparison. Is this what happens inside you, or is there a different process? It's conceivable that the chatbot could give you something, or that what it would the way it would respond would show you how inept it was to do it. It does seem to me like you might be begging the question and assuming that because you're convinced that there's nothing there. It could be that there's something there, and it would be a fascinating thing to try. It would probably just lie and tell you what you thought you wanted to hear.
I think I'm already legitimately convinced on independent grounds that what goes on in the chatbot is the result of A and B. A programmer giving specific rules to follow, and then B, a programmer giving rules for suspending rules, or seeming to suspend rules and learning, so that I can be sure ahead of time, or at least highly likely right, to think that what will come back at best, if she's been programmed well, is a standard third personal line. I mean, it seems to me that given my view, the only way I can judge whether, as you say, it's honest or dishonest, I of course don't think the machine can be honest or dishonest, just the programmer. The only way I can judge whether it's honest or dishonest would be by discussing it with another human being.
I'm not sure you're not begging the question. I think what's going on here is partly we talked about how, we as theologically minded folks, people who regard the human as something precious and unique compared to other life forms, and certainly, say, rocks, we have a certain fear. And our fear is the one we talked about before, that maybe the materialists are right, and it turns out that we're nothing but, Nero firings that can be reproduced adequately by a human invention. But
Not me. I feel certain, I'm afraid, that that's impossible because
but
the argument for performative consistency. And I don't think that's question begging. If that argument is question begging, then I'm dead. I would not be satisfied with that argument if I thought it were even potentially correct.
Okay.
It is the one and perhaps the only argument in philosophy which it seems to me is ungainsayable, not even contestable, because that can't be done without self-refutation.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go back, watch the explanation you already gave. I think that would be sufficient for me to decide if I'm misunderstanding you or if I still have a challenge. But the counter, or a fear that kind of a reciprocal or a symmetrical, I don't know, an inverse fear. I'll cut this out once I find the right word, but a parallel fear might be that human beings could create artificially through artificial process something that would count as intelligence and sentience, and then therefore something that would be like a new being with all the rights that a human would have. In other words, we would be afraid that Frankenstein would succeed. He would make a human, or he would make a machine that was essentially sentient and had intelligence, in that it might strike us as sacrilege.
No, I would not grant that possibility unless I were come to doubt the superiority of the first personal method of examination and my results. I do allow that a fourth sort of AI, which I had not mentioned, so-called wet AI, which is rooted not in electrical engineering, but in biochemical engineering,
Yes.
could conceivably do it. Because if you could grow a fucking brain, then conscious intentional subjectivity and acts could conceivably well up. Now, I doubt it, and it's a long way off, people say, even trying it, but I do feel as confident as I can be about anything that electricity and metal do not possess consciousness, intentionality, and so on. And that there is no reason to think that there's anything going on in the computers besides electrical state change.
I know. Look, I know you feel that powerfully, and I think you're right. But to me, it seems so new that it seems premature to be quite that certain about it.
What seems so new?
AI.
That's no, but look, I mean, there are two things here, right? The descriptive analysis of what's going on in the AI, and then the argument from performative consistency. The descriptive analysis, it seems to me, is probabilistic and open to revision, and would have to proceed in the way that you say. But the argument from performative consistency seems to me to rule out with certainty the possibility that thinking might happen outside the context of conscious intentional action.
I'll have to rewind the tape. I'm going to leave that for now. I do wonder if it doesn't, the outline cases that we talked about before about the supposed hallucination or the programmer not knowing what's going on, if there isn't possibly
That's a good point.
something more to it.
That's a good point.
And again, I
forgot about that.
Which podcast did I start talking shit about E equals MC squared? I think it was the previous podcast.
Sure.
And again, I admit, I was last time I was saying, look, I don't know what I'm talking about here, but it does occur to me that if matter can be energy, then maybe energy could be spirit. And so
you remember I didn't like that.
No, I know you didn't. And I admit I have no idea what I'm talking about. But somebody who does know what he's talking about might just laugh and say, look,
or he might like
go back to correcting grammar.
But he might like
I think it's fun. And it's a little scary.
No, I'd be happy to try.
But suppose I was fascinated by you saying the wet AI, because that was something I think I've seen. I should go back and find this out, but I think that scientists have found that if you put, you put certain proteins in a petri dish and you put them nearby and you stimulate them somehow, they start to divide, something like I don't know, cellular division. And it's the kind of thing that makes you think, look, if you can do that just by putting shit together in a petri dish, that maybe if you get really sophisticated at it, maybe you could make life.
And it
wouldn't be spontaneous generation, but it wouldn't be biological reproduction either. It would be petri dish.
And I don't think that conscious intentionality exists separately from biological operation. I don't think it's reducible to it, but I don't think it. I mean, maybe once you die, it separates or exists separately. But in this life, I don't think there's any evidence to think that conscious intentional operation occurs without a biological foundation.
That's fascinating, based on what we said last time about the spirit and the body and the insistence on Christianity that the two have to be united.
That's right.
Christ has raised, had stigmata and wanted fish.
Right.
Okay, good. So back to the thematic and pre-thematic. When he says adverts, what I translate that into is notices or recognizes or is conscious of, pays attention to.
I wouldn't want to use the word conscious there.
Okay.
That is the mistake, to think that consciousness is only directed.
Okay, so but
Aware of, sure.
becomes aware of, notices,
Notices I like because that implies.
or even pays attention to might be best.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, so you were talking before about some aspect of quantum mechanics, and it was something like, certain things in certain phenomena you can't observe, but you can observe them by their effects.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, that's what you're saying about human intellect.
Yeah.
That you inhabit yourself, and you be yourself. So it's the distinction between being and knowing, and that there are certain how should I put it? There's a certain aspect of your being that is always going to elude your knowing. You can be yourself, but you cannot fully observe yourself as you be yourself, in the way that you can't run outside the house real quick, look inside the window to see yourself. You can't crane your neck around, as you said, Heidegger said, to observe the self.
No, but I think that once you have the pre-reflexive awareness of yourself, you can thematize it and know it.
But after the fact.
Yes.
Not in the fact.
Not during.
So it makes me think of all sorts of expressions of this, like Lewis was saying, you're sawing off the branch you're sitting on, but more especially the one from Wittgenstein's Vienna by authors named, I think, Janek and Toulmin.
That's right.
Super good book, and not just about Wittgenstein, obviously, but they say that the best example of explaining what Wittgenstein was trying to get at in certain points of his philosophy was that you cannot see the light you're seeing with.
The sight or the light?
The light. You cannot see the light you're seeing with. Because you'd have to step outside of yourself, maybe make it into a third-person interaction, observe your eye, observe the light, watch the light go between you and the object. But you can't do that, because then you'd be looking from the side. You can't run outside the house and watch yourself from the perpendicular.
I think the analogy is imperfect, but go ahead.
Well, I thought it was a wonderful one.
Light is not part of conscious intentionality. It's part of the physical world.
Well, my point is that it's just supposed to be.
There's intellectual.
It's a metaphor. It's an analogy. It's saying that.
Yeah.
No, it's just saying that the analogy is that while you're, it's just saying that while you are running, you can't be in the stands watching yourself running.
Yes.
Right. And this goes back to all the stuff I wrote about in Idling the Engine. Yeah. That's what I think Idling the Engine is. And so
right.
I think you mentioned that Husserl started off trying to analyze, what would you call it? The consciousness? Is that his object? What's the word?
The conscious intentional operations involved in logical inference.
That's what I meant. That he thought about that from the third person perspective, and he thought, no, you have to do it from the first person.
Yeah.
Okay, that is almost, isn't that a really precise parallel of Wittgenstein when he goes from the Tractatus to just the observations of the ordinary use of language? And it's not precise, although I just said it was, that in the Tractatus he's saying, okay, look, let's kind of map this out as if from the side syllogistically. And if you know the Tractatus, it's very strict logical propositions. That's the whole book, almost.
Yeah.
And then he says, okay, no, that's wrong. That's missing all sorts of things. It was reductive. It seems more intellectual, more sophisticated, but actually it's less sophisticated than simply watching language and observing it, explaining what you see or what it does while you use it or while someone else uses it. So it seems to me there's something, it's not, I said precise, that's not right, but what he's trying to do is work, kind of explain language from within language, rather than to get outside language and say, okay, here's my crystalline idea of what language would have to do in order to work. Instead, I'm just going to essentially trust language and explain or observe what's happening as it's used on the ground in common, ordinary speak.
Two quick responses.
Sure.
I want to say yes and no.
Cool.
Well, three things. One, yes, the Tractatus is in a way a third personal approach. And I should have mentioned that it's not as if all philosophy is phenomenology and first personal. No. Much of philosophy is metaphysics. And a metaphysician does not avail himself of the pre-reflexive awareness he has on himself and then check it out. A metaphysician just speculates about the nature of things. And it does look like Wittgenstein was doing that in the Tractatus. And it does look like in turning from the Tractatus to the later work, he makes a fundamental improvement. And I would put the improvement like this. I would say he appropriately turns from speculation to examination of performance. But I'm afraid that I still think there's a residually third personal approach in Wittgenstein that is at least akin to the behaviorist's approach, because Wittgenstein does not think that we should examine the data that we have on ourselves pre-reflexively. And in fact, he's pretty suspicious of the mental, and instead wants to say so I would say, like the phenomenologist, he correctly turns away from abstract speculation concrete attention to performance, lived experience. But it seems to me that he comes close to throwing out the mental and attributing to behavior, linguistic behavior, language gaming, and so on. He places either too much stock in that or only places stock in that.
That's very good. That's very helpful. I think I think the way you described it is more precise, and it does remind me that there are passages in Wittgenstein, even in the late Wittgenstein, in the Investigations, where he does seem almost to take the angle that some of the I guess the people who talk about AI and focus strictly on the results take. Namely, that if it pumps out the same result, well, then it's the same thing. It's a black box.
That's right.
There's no getting into the black box. Other times, I don't think he would settle for that. And what he's doing often in his late philosophy is just writing these aphorisms and kind of taking his thoughts where it goes.
Right.
And it seems to me he hasn't thought all the way to the bottom of many of those things. There's another another kind of confusion or preoccupation I've had, or a conversation we've had over the years. And we can't talk about it now, but another just kind of tag for a future discussion. I will sometimes say, no, but Wittgenstein is just talking about language. And what he says about language in no way severs us from a transcendent. What it does is it frees us from facile ideas of language that assume that there was a correspondence between language and something transcendent. And that what I take Wittgenstein to do is to free us from that kind of that constriction. And it leaves open the possibility of, what he calls das Mystische, the mystical. Yeah. And that's what makes me think that he might see things more our way.
No, I accept that, I think.
Anyway, sometime let's go back to that. So here's the one I think is the coolest. It's Satan, and it's specifically Milton's Satan. And this applies, I think, to the atheists too.
Yeah.
Now, when Dennett and others, and Dennett, God rest his soul, probably wouldn't be happy for me to have said that.
Of happy memory.
When he says, look, I'd be happy to look inside myself and see something, but there's nothing there. And he did in the podcast with Peterson that he did just probably a couple of days before he passed, is he said, look, people think there's like a little, a stage or a film screen or something going on inside your head. And I didn't know exactly what he was referring to. And he says, but there's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what you were talking about when you were saying that the people who take the third person perspective, they always want to see it from outside. And so what he would be doing is trying to see the light that we're seeing with. And he'd say, okay, suppose you did somehow real quick, like the flash, go perpendicular. Like, here's what you're seeing, and you real fast go like this, and you look at that like this, like trying to catch the back of your head in the mirror. What he seems not to get is that once you get perpendicular like that, well, then you're already distanced from your pre-thematic being, which it's like, that's where like being and knowing are no longer distinct.
Superb.
Right. And so he would have to constantly be making right angles and racing to try to get ahead of himself, and he can't do it.
That's right.
So racing outside the house, he's looking in through the window, but to really get at the real Daniel Dennett, he would have to race outside of, across the street and look from the other angle. Okay, so this is fascinating because what it seems to me is that Milton, very much embellishing the Genesis story, as Satan used this logical, existential quirk of human nature as a lever by which to ground his justification for rebelling against God. And he knows it's bullshit.
Oh,
Satan does.
Wow.
He does it anyway. And then later, Eve does it too.
Ooh.
And what they do is they make a lever out of their human finitude, the finite nature of their knowing, which is that you cannot see the light you're seeing with.
Yeah.
You cannot be yourself and observe yourself from afar. Hey, Antoine.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. We'll take it up, or we'll leave it in. How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Would you like better Wittgenstein or Heidegger?
Wittgenstein has a cool name.
So we know that in Paradise Lost that what's really rankling Satan is that God the Father has declared the Son second only to him. And Satan was, if not the first archangel, among the first archangels. And so he thought of himself as being here and God being here. And so when God makes this announcement, and it sounds as if God is announcing the birth of the Son, although that's clearly not true because we are told later that he created the universe, which doesn't mean everything that exists like heaven, but it does mean all the human world, including, or also anything sub-God like the angels. But what Satan felt was that God was inserting something, God the Father was inserting something between him and God, namely God the Son. And instead of thinking of that as a kind of glue or a medium that connected them more tightly, it seemed to Satan to open the gap. But Satan still thought the gap was small enough that he could leap into it. Of course, what happens? He leaps and he falls forever into damnation, and that's my metaphor. But anyway, the point is that Milton gives us the real reason that he rebels, and I think that Milton coins the term self-esteem in that book, and he says that Satan thought himself impaired, so he thought he was lessened by the Son being exalted. And of course, that is the mistake. And Satan, he knows everything he does wrong, and he does it anyway. That's why he's such a perfect embodiment of sin, right? Because you do something wrong, you don't know it. It technically doesn't count as sin exactly, not moral sin. It might be, you might be causing harm, but you're not willfully choosing the wrong. And that's what Satan does repeatedly. Now, that's too facile, and you could tear that apart or sophisticate it up, I'm sure. But what's cool is that he invites a third of the angels out, a third of the angels plus one. There's one angel that is invited out to some remote place where they can plot. And there's only one that rejects the proposition. But what Satan does when he enjoins all the other angels to rebel is he says, do you really want to accept the fact that we're supposedly created by secondary hands, by the Son instead of the Father? I reject that. And in talking to this angel, the angel says, no, we know what happened. We know, the lore. We have been told, God told us that we were created by the Son. And Satan says, oh, strange doctrine and new. Whence learned you this? I'm paraphrasing it pretty poorly. We know no time when we were not as we are now. How do you know what happened at our birth? And he says, he basically is implying, saying, were you there when you came into being? I wasn't there when I came into being. So Abdil, that's the non-rebellious angel, if you can give me the experience of seeing myself come into being, well, then I'll admit that I was created by the Son. But until you can do that, we're going to rebel. So it seems to me what he's doing, and he knows he's doing, he's saying, I'm going to demand something that cannot be given to me. And if it can't be given to me, then that's going to be my justification for rebelling. In other words, I'm going to deny that I am a finite being. Unless you could give me the experience of an infinite being, then to hell with you and to hell with God. I'm going to declare myself infinite. If you can't prove that I'm finite, I'm going to declare myself infinite. So the problem there seems to me very parallel. And I could have explained that better. I might have to try to take another bite of that apple sometime. But it was a bad pun. The parallel seems to me to be with the atheists who will say, well, if you can't give me proof of something that I can't know in the way that I know, then I refuse to believe in it.
In the way that I know.
Right. The idea is that, so the way that they say the only kind of knowledge that will count as knowledge is materialistic, scientific.
Third personal thematic.
Third person thematic, right. And so if you can't give me the knowledge of something that goes beyond that state of affairs or that existential grounding, then I'm going to reject it. And so it's using its own finitude, or they're using their own finitude as a way of rejecting anything that goes beyond their finitude. That's the rules of the game that they set. So if Satan says, if you can't give me knowledge of myself from outside of myself, if you can't give me, knowledge of my pre-thematic self, but distanced third person, pre-thematic knowledge, then I'm going to reject the idea of pre-thematic knowledge or of the state where being and knowing are one.
Motherfucker, that's super good. Quick comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes and no. Absolutely yes. It seems to me that it is a quasi-satanic insistence to insist that we know God from a third personal standpoint, a refusal of finitude and so on, and self-undermining, because of course the way in which you know that is not the way in which you demand that you know things. But I would not want to say that the first personal vantage point, that the pre-thematic implicit approach or stance, is one which prevents us from knowing. I think that by way of thematizing the pre-thematic and inquiring into it, we can come to know one hell of a lot. I'm an Aristotelian Thomist. I think that just with pure reason, you can come to know one hell of a lot. But in a way that exactly fits with what you said, the one thing that thematizing your pre-thematic awareness of yourself cannot get you to is knowledge of God. And yet it is by way of your pre-thematic lived experience that you dimly intimate and are open to God.
Yeah, that's excellent. I know I didn't absorb it all, but I think that's exactly right. So I was tempted to go over to the bookshelf over there and grab out Paradise Lost and read it, because I botched the quotation and kind of lost the thread. But it's so rich and it's so deep that I think we should just punt it to another podcast. It's because it's super fun.
Yeah.
After the fall, Adam reflects on all this, and Eve is wicked smart. Adam is a little bit smarter than she is, and understands these things and convicts himself after the fall. And so what he says, basically, just to kind of cut to the chase for him, then we can be done for today unless you want to add something. He says the paradox of the knowledge of good and evil
Yes.
is that good, at least, I think only good. I'm not sure. I never thought about this before, but definitely good, maybe evil too, but definitely only good, is actually pre-thematic, or at least if you say innocence.
Wow.
Innocence is pre-thematic. And what he says is,
Oh, I got it.
now we've fallen.
Yeah.
And, before they
Yes.
said, well,
Right.
if we eat from the tree, we'll be dead. And he says, whatever
Right.
that is.
That's right.
They're the first two people. They've never seen anything dead yet. And then he says, once they do eat from the tree, he says, shit, now I know the difference between good and evil. He says, basically, evil got, innocence lost.
Yes.
So he only knows innocence once he takes off the glasses and sees it from afar,
Yeah.
and no longer bees it. He no longer
Yes.
is innocent or good
Yep.
or innocent. And it's heartbreaking because now you see it. And it's like the first time you've ever
Yeah.
committed a sin or a crime or a betrayal of a loved one or a friend. And you realize that the old me is over there now.
Yeah.
It's never here.
got it.
And I could not. And the thing, here's the catch. And this is what's so cool about it. God tells them, you can't eat from the tree. And they say, and Eve says, essentially, and students say this over and over again every time we read Genesis or Paradise Lost, they say, well, tell me why. I need to know why. And God doesn't say it, but I think the wisdom of the book is you can't know why because you have this finite human perspective. You can't be in yourself and outside of yourself at the same time. And so you can be innocent, you can be pure, you can be good, but you cannot. And this is the trick. You, in a sense, you do know it better once you lose it. Once you do take off the glasses and look at it, you're like, oh, that's what glasses are. And in a sense, you do know it better because it becomes thematic. But the only way you can get to that superior knowledge is by destroying yourself. And so they should have trusted God because they would have been better had they not rejected the whole system. And what they reject about it is the finitude. And that brings me back to the atheists. The atheists don't want to acknowledge that there's some sort of knowledge that might be beyond their hardware.
Right. These people are trying to run up against the limits of language in a different way.
Yes, of consciousness, of being, of finitude, right?
Right. So the pride is epistemic and not just volitional or something.
Yeah.
I think that shit about it. I mean, you're making an analogy. You're discussing the difference between consciousness, pre-reflexive awareness of oneself, and third personal knowledge of things. And I think in Aquinas, that distinction is, in fact, the difference between immediate awareness and mediated awareness. But the point would remain the same. I don't know. It may be that what you said is actually exactly fit with Aquinas, or it may be that it's just analogous. But either way, it could not be a much more important insight. And I have always suspected, not just because you're interested in it, but I've always suspected that Paradise Lost contains huge import for these matters. I'm gonna go read your chapter on it, and then some, and then I'll eventually read the whole book, and we do a podcast, and we tie theory of knowledge to the most important things, which I never thought I'd get to.
Awesome. Thanks. Woo! 2 down. 2 in the bin. Thanks everybody.
y'all.
See you next time.
We did pretty good. Yeah, I did. These podcasts have been so productive. I'm so used to thinking that I only made progress from 10 years of sitting at the desk, but I made way more progress today than I have last time.